Today we're going to be installing our Easy Steer power steering kit. This installation will apply across the board for the RZR 1000, the RZR Turbo, and the RZR 900. Today we're going to be installing it on the RZR 900, so let's get started. The first step is to remove the front wheels and tires. Remove the hood. Once the hood's removed, remove these two screws. We have a flip windshield on this machine, so we had to remove the lower portion of it. Once it's removed, you can go ahead and push the dash forward or towards the inside of the machine. Start unplugging the connections. Then remove the dash from the machine. The next thing we're going to do is remove the steering wheel. You want to go ahead and remove the centerpiece off the steering wheel. Now loosen the nut. Take a socket, we're using a 19mm, lay it on the nut. Take a hammer. Give it a couple hits. Then remove the steering wheel off the splines on the steering shaft. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the cover by disconnecting these two bolts. Remove the cover and set it aside. Remove the two plugs on top of the factory motor. Then remove the harness off of the back side of the motor as well. Now we're going to remove these two bolts from the tilt steering assembly. Then remove the tilt wheel assembly. You just let it hang. Then disconnect the bolt holding the steering shaft to the power steering motor. Once the bolt's removed, pull the assembly off the motor and set it aside. Disconnect the lower steering shaft by undoing this nut and removing the bolt. We're going to remove the 4 nuts holding the assembly to the pedal. Once you have all your nuts removed, you can go ahead and remove the motor. Now remove the lower steering shaft from the rack and pinion. You may have to rotate it in order to be able to get a ratchet. Once it's loose, you may have to rotate it again in order to get the bolt out. And then you want to pull the steering shaft out from the inside. When removing the shaft, you may have to spray some lubricant on it. If it doesn't come loose with some lubricant, you may want to take a pry bar and stick the blade of the pry bar in between this gap here to kind of spread it open, and then it should come right off of the rack and pinion. The next thing we're going to do is install our motor mount to our support. Be sure that the angled portion of the support is facing downward and match it up to the angle on the motor mount, like so. Then take your M8 by 20mm hardware and M8 nut. Be sure that the bolt head is facing outward. Then go ahead and fully tighten all the hardware. The next step, we're going to get our motor and install it to the motor mount. Be sure not to fully tighten the hardware yet because you will have to make some adjustments. We're going to continue the install without using our motor cover. If you would like to use it, we provided holes in the motor mount. You will have to cut off this section here due to the easy steer motor being bigger than the factory one. We're going to install the lower steering shaft. You want to make sure that the fixed end is going towards the rack and pinion. Go ahead and take the bolt out. We're going to insert it through the firewall. After you push the steering shaft through the hole in the firewall, you're going to want to make sure that the splines on the rack and pinion line up with the splines on the steering shaft, and you'll want to install your bolt. Now we're going to install the motor and motor assembly to the lower shaft, and then to the studs that hold the foot pedal. Now tighten everything up. We're going to install the tilt steering assembly and the upper steering shaft. First thing we're going to do though is install the upper steering shaft to the power steering unit. I'm going to go ahead and remove the bolt. Go ahead and install it on the splines and take your bolt. Go ahead and thread it in. Get it hand tight. Then we're going to take our tilt steering assembly, flip it up like this. You're going to want to take your factory spacers, install one here, and we're going to install the shaft. Take the other spacer, sit right there. We're going to put this back in the factory location using the factory bolts. Now we're going to install the nuts for the tilt steering assembly. Then go ahead and tighten them. Install the factory shoulder bolt to the tilt adjuster. We're going to go ahead and fully tighten it. Now it's time to reinstall the steering wheel. Before we do this, you want to make sure that your rack is centered. You want to make sure that you get the steering wheel on there straight. You'll have to reach down and grab a hold of the upper steering shaft, push it upward until you can get your steering wheel started on the splines. Then you'll take your nut, before you tighten it, make sure that the steering wheel's straight and that the rack is straight or that the wheels are straight. Get it nice and tight. Then we're going to want to go down here and fully tighten both of these pinch bolts, the one attaching the upper shaft to the easy steer unit and this one here. Once everything's tight, go ahead and install the steering wheel cap. We're going to install the ECU to the machine using the provided bracket and hardware. The bracket will lay up against the ECU like so. This is going to install to the outside of this frame bracket, like this. And the bracket is going to go inside with the screws going through the bracket into the ECU. Be sure that the big plug is facing inward towards the machine, and then go ahead and fully tighten all the hardware. So before installing our wiring harness, we're going to want to remove the grommet. So where it's perforated here, we're going to go ahead and make some slits in order to feed our harness through it. Once you've made a few slits, go ahead and reinstall it. We're going to install our wiring harness. Before we start the installation, there's a few things we want to tell you. These wiring harnesses are going to be the same across the board for any 400 watt ECU, so you're going to have extra wiring. You can coil it up, or if you're pretty slick with wiring, you can cut the connections down, shorten the harness. Also, there's going to be a blue wire, which is not going to be used. You can just coil this up or trim it. We're going to push our red and black wire, as well as our white wire, through the hole in the grommet. We're just going to set these aside for just a moment. And we're going to take our plugs and plug them into the ECU. The big plug is going to go to this plug here. The small is going to go to the one directly below it. When plugging these into the ECU, you want to push them until you hear the click. Otherwise, it'll make a bad connection. Now while we're down here, we're going to go ahead and take the rubber band off of the harness for the motor. So we have our big plug and small plug. The big plug is going to go right here. Again, make sure when you're plugging it in, you push it until you hear it snap. We'll do the same thing with the small plug. There we go. So for this application, we're going to want to cut off the spade connector and use the provided eyelet connector. So we're just going to go ahead and cut it off right behind this connection. Then we're going to want to skin the wire back. Twist it up nice and tight. We're going to go ahead and insert it into our connector. Take our crimps. Make sure the connection's nice and tight. Then we're going to go ahead and wire them to the bus bar. This far left post is going to be your key on source. So you'll take your white activation wire that you previously crimped the eyelet on, Reinstall the nut. Go ahead and fully tighten this one. And then these other two posts here, the one in the center is going to be the ground and this one will be the battery, or the all-time hot. If your bus bar is hooked up, being that it has power going to it, you want to hook the black wire to the center, which will be the ground, and the red to the far right, which will be the hot. If not, you want to run these two wires directly to your battery. Once you got your power harness wired to either the bus bar or the battery, go ahead and reinstall all factory components and make sure everything's tight, and then we can get on outside and test our power steering out. And that's how super easy it is to install SuperATV's Easy Steer Power Steering Kit on this Polaris RZR 900. For more information on this power steering kit or any of SuperATV's great products, give us a call at 855-743-3427 or check us out online at superatv.com. Thanks for watching and have a great day.